So I'm going to be giving you some updates on advancements in psychedelic therapies in European healthcare, particularly focusing on the regulatory side, a little bit on the research side as well. And yes, I have a clicker here for the next slide. So first, just a little bit about PAREA, where I'm working now. PAREA stands for Psychedelic Access and Research European Alliance, and it's also a Greek word that means a close-knit group of friends who regularly gather together for companionship, sharing experiences, and in our case, also with this shared mission. In this spirit, we're a nonprofit organization and also a multidisciplinary partnership. We unite various organizations, as you can see on the screen, of patients, clinicians, civil society, and the health space in general, so beyond mental health to brain health to neurology as well as national psychedelic organizations. And essentially, we have the shared aim of advancing safe, effective, ethical, and accessible evidence-based psychedelic therapies in Europe, just with the focus of improving the well-being of people in need. We want psychedelic therapies to be legally and equitably integrated into European healthcare systems. And beyond the organizations on the screen, we also have a wide network of community supporters, of which the Center of Evidence-Based Drug Policy and Psilocybin Access Rights are a part of, so connects with Timmy's talk in that way. And I've also seen some really great talks about implementation and accessibility in the conference so far. So I'm happy to be able to bring maybe a little bit of the regulatory side that comes beforehand. So this is how it will fit in, with a little bit of a EU focus, I have to add as well. So to just briefly paint a picture of why this is so crucial, and this really comes down to just the scale of needs in mental health. It's known that 1 in 6 people have a mental health condition. These are numbers actually from before the COVID pandemic, so expected to have shifted a little bit in the meantime. In a presentation yesterday, I saw that it was 1 in 4 in the UK. And this has huge repercussions in an individual's life, not only from the perspective of their health, but also their entire life and their networks. And from the societal lens, which is also quite impactful when you're talking about regulation and policymaking, it can be one of the largest impactors on things like work productivity, and it can cost up to 4% of European GDP annually as well. And at the same time, this is coupled with large treatment and innovation gaps in psychiatry. As a little EMA fact, in the past 5 years, there have been around 5 new treatments in psychiatry approved, compared to about 120 in oncology. And most treatments that we do have haven't seen any significant innovation in terms of mechanisms from those introduced around 50 years ago. And not downplaying the importance of these treatments and that they can really help people, but at the same time, they can have a bit of an isolated focus on very specific mechanisms and not necessarily work to address root causes of suffering. And actually, it's known that they also don't necessarily sufficiently work for up to half of the population that is treated. So this is where we see psychedelic therapies coming in. I'm not going to go into the details of all the research behind their mechanisms and therapeutic potential, but essentially I want to highlight that the last years have seen a huge surge in their clinical evidence bases, with a very large amount of clinical trials. And also they're already being legally, clinically applied in certain contexts and in certain countries within special schemes. One example could be Australia's authorized prescriber scheme, or in different countries, compassionate use programs. And a little asterisk here, when I'm talking about psychedelics now, I'm referring mostly to serotonergic psychedelics and MDMA, because the story of ketamine and esketamine is a completely different one, given that these are actually approved drugs already. So I'll be focusing more on the others. But the road to having psychedelic therapies accessible in healthcare systems is still really long, and it has a few obstacles at different stages of development. Some of them have already been mentioned in other talks as well, and I mean, each of the things on the slide could be really a talk of its own. I'll be talking especially about the regulatory side, as I mentioned before, and on the implementation and access side, we have seen a wonderful presentation about that, and also I want to highlight this report, co-authored actually by Floris and Martin here, that was presented yesterday, and which covers more that side of things. And yes, so now I will move on to the first part of the regulation side. So as I mentioned, I was at the European Medicines Agency. I arrived there in late 2023. And when I got there, there was already some initial engagement with the field of psychedelics. There had been some papers published by the network. And importantly, there was already the ongoing organization of the EMA Multi-Stakeholder Workshop on psychedelics. And there was also the ongoing revision of the EMA clinical guideline on investigation of products for depression. And then complementary to these two activities, as I got there, I wanted to kind of lead my own project. And so I also led this review of clinical trials of psychedelics for depression. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is to kind of go through the different initiatives and then culminate with summarizing the initial regulatory considerations. So starting with the workshop, this was an event that took place on the 16th and 17th of April 2024. So it was just 1 year ago today, a few days ago. It was an event that was hybrid in format. It was attended by over 150 participants in the room, and there was also a live stream, which had, I think, about 100 more. And really the aim here was to gather as many stakeholders as possible, not only from the regulatory side, of which there was quite a bit of representation. There was somebody from the FDA, from Therapeutic Goods Australia, from Health Canada, from different European countries as well. And also representatives of healthcare professionals, of patient organizations, industry, researchers, civil society, learned societies. And the idea was really to have open discussions on the current standing of the field, and also to understand the challenges to their development and real-world application and the areas where regulatory support was needed. There were 3 sessions spread over 1 day and a half. They each had individual presentations or panels, and then after each of the session, importantly, there was always an hour of just open discussions with the audience. The first session was more focusing on different stakeholder perspectives, and then all the other sessions were narrowing in a little bit more, first on clinical trial design, and then considerations for real-world application. If you're interested, there's recordings from the workshop and a comprehensive report freely available online. But before the report was made available, there was actually a little comment that we published on The Lancet, which aimed to emphasize the 3 main preliminary takeaways from the workshop discussions. The first one was really the importance of adhering to existing regulatory frameworks, but the encouragement to seek engagement with regulators early on to make sure that the frameworks are adhered to, but also to understand how the particularities of psychedelics can fit these frameworks. The second one is the value of ongoingly incorporating patient perspectives and lived experience perspectives from trial participants in the design of development programs and the delivery of the treatments themselves, obviously because of the unique and individualized features of psychedelics. And importantly, the need to continue multi-stakeholder collaborations, not just with regulators, but also among different groups at different levels of development, to address areas that maybe medicines regulators don't have a lot of authority on, like the actual clinical application of treatments or ethics and other aspects like that. So in parallel to the workshop, there was the ongoing depression of the EMA guideline on clinical investigation of products in depression. For context, these EMA scientific guidelines are documents which are non-binding, and the aim is to reflect the current state of the art in a specific field of drug development and evaluation. They really want to support high-quality, ethically sound research that meets regulatory requirements to then have a marketing authorization application and wide access later on. And for this reason, they are periodically revised in response to newly established evidence. Updates are developed by expert regulators in that particular therapeutic area and also informed by public consultations. It's quite a lengthy process, as you can probably see by the dates on the slide. This latest revision of the depression guideline aims to address a lot of evolving needs in the field. One of them is treatment resistance. And also targeting specific symptom clusters within depression as well. And importantly, for this presentation, a key addition in the third revision of the guideline is a section on psychedelics. And there was a draft version released in 2023 that already had a draft version of this section, so we already knew that the development was coming. And then this was the version that was publicly available also for public consultation. Parea actually participated in the public consultation while I was still at the European Medicines Agency. And the final version was adopted in January 2025. And it's going to come into effect in September 2025. And it expands a bit on the draft version of the psychedelic section that was already available in 2023. And essentially, this section includes initial and broad considerations on doing clinical trials with psychedelics related to, for example, target population selection, choice of a comparator, matters related to expectancy and unblinding, and dosing, maintenance of effect, safety aspects, the use of psychological support or psychotherapy, and also at the end emphasizing really, again, engagement with regulators to have a case-by-case approach that fits the development program. But I'm going to be presenting the content of the considerations in a little bit more detail in a few slides. First, I just want to also present to you the project that I undertook while I was at the EMA. So I arrived there as a neuroscientist graduate, and I asked myself how I could best use my research skills and my knowledge of the field to make a significant contribution while I was there. And I had some experience doing systematic reviews from before. And so I thought that this maybe was something that I could do to help. And so I really had two aims with trying to develop a review there. One of them was to build a comprehensive database for regulators, but not only, also and beyond, to increase awareness and preparedness. And here I wanted to focus on clinical trials and the methodologies applied in these clinical trials. So the kinds of clinical trials that had been done and how they compared to the evidence standards that regulators need and are interested in. I developed a systematic search approach, and I also predefined then the variables that I was interested in by talking with my colleagues and understanding the variables that they would be interested in looking at. So this was one part of it, and then at the same time I was immersed in this regulatory environment, and I wanted to use the fact that I was in this unique position, learning a lot firsthand about these developing perspectives, and to find a way to just communicate them widely and usefully against the trial work that had been done. And when I talk about evolving EU regulatory perspectives, this is really the content that was being developed in the guideline, which is largely connected also to the discussions that were had in the workshop. So the goal of this presentation today is not to go into depth into the review, but I'll just give you a little bit of information about it. And I'm also really happy to share that as of a month ago, it's been published, and you can go openly read it on Neuroscience Applied. But in brief, I designed a search by combining terms that were specific for psychedelics drugs, both broad class terms as well as focusing on each drug one by one. And then I also had a group of terms built to identify randomized control trials based on an existing filter. And I applied these terms in February 2024 to scientific databases and trial registries. And I got just under 8,000 results, which I screened through for eligibility. And here it's important to highlight again, first, that the search was done in February 2024, so that other things might have come up in the meantime, but also that I was interested in trials that were testing the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, so as a treatment intervention. So I was focusing on patient populations and on trials that had one of the primary outcome measures be a measure of efficacy. And essentially, after I did this, I grouped all the publications by trials, and I found 101 trials. And then of these, I was focusing on the ones that had been already completed so far, and that had been done in depression. Depression because that was the topic of the guideline, and the ones that were completed because of information availability. And I found that at that point, there were 8 completed trials in depression, which was a bit less than I was expecting. And most of them were phase 2. And I mean, to me, the message here is that there is a lot of work still that needs to be done. And of course, inherently, these trials aren't designed to meet regulatory requirements as they are. But it highlights also the ongoing activity in the field. And then I aim to discuss these trials against the regulatory considerations from the guideline, which I will summarize in these next few slides. The first set of considerations is related to functional unblinding and expectancy. This is a huge topic in the field, of course, and to me the main message here is that it's an important consideration, but there are strategies that can be used to mitigate these sources of bias, and they're specifically named in the guideline. Then, pertaining to dose response and the duration of effects, the guideline really emphasizes the importance of characterizing the relationship between the dose and therapeutic benefits, but also between the subjective effects and therapeutic benefits. And there's a lot of research nowadays that is focusing specifically on this, a lot of measures that can be used. And this is also important. We were talking about product labeling and information in the previous presentation. And I think it's important to keep in mind that when a medicine is approved and it becomes widely available, it's important to characterize the subjective effects to then inform the clinicians and inform the patients of what they can expect. So it's important to systematically assess, for example, any effects related to safety, and also doing it as in the longer term, so produce more long-term safety and efficacy data. Then, in regards to population, the guideline recommends starting development in a more severely affected population, for example, one with treatment resistance. This is, on one hand, due to the large scale of unmet needs, but then this is also important when it comes, if you think about it, to healthcare system preparedness, as was mentioned in a presentation yesterday, because if this was to be approved as a first-line treatment for everyone, it would, the systems wouldn't be prepared for it right away. It's also really important to continue generating data on inter-individual variability and drug-drug interactions. Of course, larger trials are needed for this, and this is also an area where perhaps real-world data afterwards could come in for further characterization. And lastly, in relation to treatment framework, this is just a term that I use to basically mean anything in the treatment that is not the sole administration of the psychedelic drug. The key here is that whatever support is given, whatever psychotherapeutic intervention and support are given, they need to be very clearly defined, again, to inform product labeling, to inform clinical application later on. So really communicating this clearly. And this also, and the guidelines specifically mentions also the importance of addressing how this will be extrapolated into clinical practice. So this was briefly it from the regulatory side. And now I also want to give an update from the research side, which is kind of a groundbreaking announcement that came from last year, which was the first EU-funded project on psychedelic therapies, which was awarded 6.5 million euros from the Horizon Europe program last year. This was about 5.5 million pounds. And essentially this is PsyPal, which is a multi-center clinical trial researching psilocybin-assisted therapy for psychological distress in people with a range of life-limiting illnesses that require palliative care. And this will focus on 4 medical conditions in 4 different expert centers across EU countries. And they are chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder in the Netherlands, ALS in Denmark, MS in Czechia, and atypical Parkinson's disease in Lisbon. And there is a 19-partner interdisciplinary consortium behind this project. And importantly, it really also aims to go beyond the clinical trial, also to look at these regulatory and implementation considerations. And then just a little bit more about the project itself. It can be divided into 2 stages. The first is going to be a 6-week trial aiming to determine the efficacy and safety of psilocybin therapy in these conditions for existential distress, and also improve understanding of their mechanisms. The 4 sites will aim to recruit 100+ patients in total, and participants are going to undergo baseline assessments 2 to 4 weeks before the first dosing, and then they will be randomized to receive either 2 active doses of psilocybin or 2 low doses of psilocybin, which are meant to function as an active comparator. Every participant is going to have 3 preparation sessions before the first dosing and 3 integration sessions after the second dosing. And then the primary outcome measure will be at 2 weeks after the second dosing, which will have been 6 weeks from baseline. The participants are then going to be unblinded, and at the 3-month mark, there's going to be more assessments to look at sustained changes, and importantly, everyone will also have the option to undergo an open-label active treatment, also framed by preparation and integration. And after this, the study will enter its second stage, which will be a continued care phase, and this will involve building tailored psychedelic aftercare and also just self-sustaining support networks for participants. And also carers. There's a big focus on just the network around the participant as well, so for carers and clinicians as well. So in terms of outcome measures, of course, there's going to be assessment of efficacy for symptoms of depression and anxiety, and also improvements in quality of life. And then there's going to be a range of measures to look at mechanisms, so focusing on biological measures, like there will be blood-based biomarkers and assessments of changes in EEG, the occurrence of spiritual and mystical phenomena during the experience and the impact of this on therapeutic outcomes, also the impact of therapeutic alliance, and there will also be the measurement of the impact of expectancy on treatment outcomes. There's going to be a wide range of exploratory measures. Just as an example, the use of psilocybin therapy on measures of spiritual well-being, attachment, pain perception, but also burden to caregivers and use of medical resources as well. And there's also going to be a qualitative interview component to understand the patient experience as a whole. And in the box, I just highlighted a few measures which I think are relevant in relation to the regulatory considerations from before. So things that can help counter, for example, expectancy and unblinding, and also focusing on characterizing dose response and the subjective experience, and also elements that will help then inform a real-world application later on. So this is my last slide, and the reason I put it here is really just to emphasize the importance of continuing to seek opportunities for, here it's EU funding, but in general public funding to support psychedelic research and research into innovative mental health therapies. The importance of continuing to seek, for example, also public-private funding opportunities in this area. And just to conclude then, for the future, the road ahead is still long, but from the Pareja side and also related to what I talked about today, we want to emphasize the importance of essentially continuing to engage in policy discussions to support and emphasize the need for innovation in mental health. And this can also be with the aim of increasing funding and research in this area, and to continue also engaging with regulators to apply the frameworks that exist and adapt the frameworks that exist to the particular features of psychedelic therapies. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention. And I think there's